So today we're looking at something called the associative property. The associative property. So that is another mathematical property related to some of the other properties that we've already covered. Now, in this case, and again, this refers to multiplication. In this case, you have three factors. Okay, remember a factor is a number in a multiplication equation. So in this case, you might have something like 2 times 3 times 5. Now that might look a little bit weird, right? It's kind of hard to know where to start in a problem like that. Now, you can draw out an array or you can draw out models. You can use whatever you need to use to solve a problem like this. But the important part about the associative property is that it tells us this. If you take and put parentheses around the first two factors right here, and you make 2 times 3 times 5, you would do the parentheses first, right? So then you get the product of that. 2 times 3 is 6. That would make this into 6 times 5. And then all you would have to know is that 6 times 5 is 30, which means that 2 times 3 times 5 is 30, okay? So that's the first part. However, let's say you looked at this problem again. You have 2 times 3 times 5, and you would rather do the 3 times 5 first. Well, if you put parentheses around the 3 times 5 and you decide to group those two factors instead, you can still do that. So you would have 3 times 5 is 15. Bring that 2 down. Then you'd have 2 times 15, which is 30. So if you can see right here, we have, it may look like two different equations, but we actually have the exact same equation. It's just grouped differently. In this case, we grouped the 3 times 5 and solved for 3 times 5 first. In this case, we grouped the 2 times 3 and solved for that first. However, we got the same product in every case. So the associative property tells us that we can take three-factor multiplication problems and we can break them up or group them differently depending on what works best for us in the situation. So let's go ahead and let's try another one as an example here. So let's go ahead and get rid of these. And let's look at a different one. And this will work for any three-factor multiplication problem. And remember, this is related to other ones in terms of things like the commutative property, for instance, which tells us that we can switch factors around as well, right? So the commutative property tells us that we have something like, if we have something like 2 times 3, that's the same as 3 times 2, okay? So in this case, we are looking at something a bit similar and similar to the distributive property as well, because we're able to group factors differently and still end up with the same product. So let's look at another one. Let's say 4 times 5 times 2. Okay? So you have 4 times 5 times 2. Let's go ahead and write that one out twice. These are the exact same equation, right? You can see that they are the exact same equation. Now, let's go ahead and break them apart a little bit differently. So this one, we're going to take 4 times 5 first. And this one, we're going to do 5 times 2. Now, the rule is whenever you see an equation that already has parentheses, always do the parentheses first, okay? It's going to make a little note here, equals first. So in this case, 4 times 5. Well, we know 4 times 5, you can get that in a number of different ways. You could break it apart. The distributive factor, the distributive property tells us that we could also break this into 2 times 5 plus 2 times 5 if that's easier. Or you can skip count by 5s, and many of you are very good at skip counting by 5s. In this case, we know that the answer is 20. That's our product there. Now we're going to drop that 2 down, and it's going to turn this into 20 times 2. Well, remember when you have 2's, you're always doubling the other factor, right? So really, 20 plus 20 is the same thing as 20 times 2. So you're going to end up with 40. Okay, now let's take a look at this one. 5 times 2 again. You have your 2's and your 5's. These are some of the easiest factors to work with, and you all are very good at skip counting with both of these. And remember again that with 2 as one of your factors, you are doubling the other factor. So 5 plus 5 is the same thing as 5 times 2. So in this case, you're going to end up with 10, right? Then you're going to drop that 4 down, and now you've got 4 times 10. And remember our 10s, you will always have a 0 in that ones place. And with the identity property, we know that 4 times 1 is going to be 4. So you end up with 40, which means that in both cases, no matter how we broke that up, if we did 4 times 5 first or 5 times 2, you still get the same product, okay? So don't let these types of problems, say in our math workbooks or anywhere else where you may encounter them, don't let them fool you. When you see these, just because they're broken up differently does not mean that they are different equations. They are the same equation, okay? And again, like I said, you can also combine properties. If you want to use the distributive property and break apart these numbers differently, let's say we had a much larger equation and you needed to break that apart, you could certainly do that. Or equation with larger factors, excuse me. You could break that apart. But just remember that even in this situation, even if we did 2 times 5 plus 2 times 5, remember, we're just doubling that 5. So now you know that together, adding these together, right, equals 20. And then you do times 2, and you're still going to get 40. Okay? So that is a very, very quick primer on the associative property, which refers to how you can break up 3-factor multiplication equations. And we will continue working on these and go a little bit further into it. But if you have questions, please do let me know.